So what I want to do now is walk through how you grade something. So for purposes of demonstrating grading, I'm actually going to use a templated exam instead. So before I start grading, I want to show you the outline for the templated exam and how it differs slightly from the outline for just sort of free-form list of questions. You still have on the right side a list of the questions that you defined and the points that each question is worth. But instead of just seeing a list of questions here, you've got the template, and I've drawn boxes around each question. And the way I did that, and I'll just scroll to the bottom of this and pretend I have a question 4 down here. If there was a question 4, I would just click and drag a box around that question. And the purpose of the box is to tell Gradescope where you expect to see that answer, so that as we start grading, it zooms in on that particular place. So I'm going to move on to grading, so you'll see what I'm talking about here. So when I start grading, I'm going to see my list of questions. I'll click on the first question. And here we've got a question 1.1. We are zoomed in on question 1.1 because that's where we drew the box. And if you zoom out, you see that it's part of course, the larger submission. But by zooming in on this box, for one thing, we're not automatically seeing the student's name. So it's not totally anonymous because you saw how easy it was for me to see that this is Hilda's submission, but it does reduce bias by not automatically showing the name. So Gradescope was designed with the idea that grading one question at a time is the most efficient and consistent way of doing things. So for purposes of how I demonstrate grading, that's the way I'm going to do it. I'm going to focus on question 1.1 for everyone first. If that's not your typical workflow, if that's not how you want to do things, you don't have to do it that way. You see there's a menu at the top which lists every question from this exam. So what you could do is just go from question 1.1 to 1.2 to 2. You could go through all the questions for this student and then move on to the next student's exam if you want to. All right, so I'm looking at, of course, the answer to question 1.1 on the left. What I'm seeing on the right side of the screen is my rubric area. So the rubric is going to basically be a list of things that the student did right or wrong and the amount of points that are being deducted or applied for doing that right or wrong thing. The correct rubric item is built in automatically. This is a correct answer, even though that's a weird looking C, it's still a C. So I can just click number 1, mark it correct. The student gets the full points, and I can now move on. I'm going to click the button in the bottom right that says Next Ungraded. And that is taking me now to same question, different student's answer. So for this particular student, a mistake was made. So I can create a rubric item on the fly and say I'm going to deduct 1 point because they're missing the 1/2. Go ahead and add that. Click number 2, that deducts the point. And now I can move on to the next student. Clicking Next Ungraded. The reason I'm using Next Ungraded, by the way, is because Gradescope was also designed with the idea that a lot of times there are multiple graders grading a big batch of exams. And Next Ungraded, as opposed to just Next, means that I'm skipping over any that have already been graded by somebody. I'm skipping over any that are being looked at currently by another grader. So it allows you to have this workflow where you're not stepping on each other's toes. All right, so let's see, the student moving on. So this student it's another student who got it correct, so I can easily just mark this correct since there's a correct rubric item. I do want to point out that there are keyboard shortcuts also kind of all over the place in Gradescope that will make things a lot faster. So I can just type the one on my keyboard. So all these rubric items are, of course, are going to be numbered, so I can use the numbers. There's other keyboard shortcuts like the Z. I just typed, allowed me to do Next Ungraded. Hovering over a lot of the buttons will show you the shortcuts, or you can go to that help.gradescope.com and type in keyboard shortcut and get sort of a cheat sheet that lets you know what the keyboard shortcuts are. So once you get savvy with your keyboard, it's going to speed things up a lot. All right, I've got a student here who has made a different mistake. Going to create another rubric item and say this one's going to be -2 for missing the constant. apply that. You may be wondering, as I build the rubric, do you have to build it on the fly every time? You do not. If you've used this before, you could be importing it from the other class or from the previous semester. So there's this import button right here, and that's what will bring up a list of all of your Gradescope classes and assignments. You can pull in rubrics that are already built. Also, while I'm here and I have a nice blank space, I can demonstrate the annotation tools. So I've got this little toolbar at the top that gives me a few annotation options. So the T is what's going to let me kind of just type in a note. So I can say missing the constant. And by the way, if you are a math instructor, Gradescope supports LaTeX kind of all over the place. So this is one place where I could use the shortcut for LaTeX, and my example is stupid, I will fully admit. But you can see I can use the double dollar signs to render things as formulas using LaTeX. LaTeX can be used in the rubric items. It can be used in online assignment questions and answers. Lots of different places you can use LaTeX. All right, so I've put my note here using the text. I can also draw right on the screen with my pencil icon. And this is possible with, a PC, a laptop, a tablet, with a stylus or with your finger. And also there is a box icon that allows you to highlight, a part of the screen if you want to do that. And all of these annotations I'm doing will be visible to the students when they log in to view their feedback. So just know that. So again, there's also this eraser icon if I want to remove everything. All right, so I've got my annotations here. I'll move on to the next one. This is a good example of somebody who made more than one mistake. So yes, you can apply more than one rubric item. So I just applied both of these. As I apply both of these, I do notice that ended up giving the student 0 points, which is really not my goal here because they did get a little piece of it right. So I'd like to give them partial credit for this. So I can do this a couple of different ways. One thing is, you notice at the bottom of the screen, there's an area called submission-specific adjustments. If for just this student, I want to say, you know what, I'm going to give you an extra half point. Now I can award them half a point without having to create a separate rubric item for it. The other thing I could do, though, if I look at this and think, you know what, I really shouldn't be deducting 2 points for missing the constant. I'm going to change this so that it's just -1 point. That fixes it for this student. It also fixes it for the last student and any students to whom that rubric or item was applied. So this is really useful, especially if you have a batch of 100 students and you're on student 70 and change your mind about how something is being graded. Retroactively fixes everything. And especially, when you were doing this on paper and you had to flip back through the whole stack of exams, it's a nightmare. So Gradescope makes that part of it really simple too. So I've just fixed it for everybody. Again, I can also do the submission specific adjustment. I can also leave a note for the student that's just for the student. Again, not a whole rubric item, but something like, please see me during office hours. And when I leave that note, another thing that's nice about this is anything I type in this box at the bottom will become part of my previously used comments dropdown. So when I move on to the next student, and here I have another student who does need to see me during office hours, I can click on the dropdown, grab that without having to type it again. So anybody who's not a particularly great typist, that's another big time saver. All right, so this was a fairly quick overview of grading, a fairly basic rubric I've created. I do want to show you on the gradescope.com site. If you've ever gone to gradescope.com, scroll down just a bit, and you're going to see real-world examples of rubrics and work that students submitted. Actual examples given to us by faculty. I like the engineering example just because I think it's a great example of something where, the student had to draw some stuff, they had to write a formula. The teacher created a long rubric that combines positive and negative scoring, which you can totally do. And so I encourage you to take a look at these. The math one, here's a good example where you can see LaTeX as part of the rubric items. So take a look at those examples if you get a chance. Coming back, just one last thing here, rubric settings. You can switch from negative scoring to positive scoring, or like you just saw, use a combination. You can adjust the floor or ceiling if you'd like to give them more than the maximum. And this can all be set up in the assignment settings as well as while you're grading.